Welcome back to Blog Access 101. I'm your host, Young Abachi. Remember, subscribe to our YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify by searching Blog Access 101. And for YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. This is episode 251 and our second part of our Women in Sports segment. I'm here today with Dr. Allison Smith. How you doing, Dr. Smith?
Hi.
How you doing? Jump right into it. If you can give everyone a brief introduction to yourself, we're dealing with your obviously collegiate career playing softball, and then now teaching in sports academia, and then writing for women's sports.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Allison Smith. As Rob said, I started my sport career in playing softball, grew up playing softball my whole life, had a chance to go play collegiate softball at both the Division One and two level. Played at Wingate University, where I had the chance to stay on and work in college sport after playing at Wingate. And that's kind of where I had the opportunity to kind of get the feel for what I wanted to kind of study when it came to getting my PhD. I was encouraged by some mentors at Wingate to kind of take the big leap and go get a PhD. And ended up at Middle Tennessee State, which was a great program, but ended up they decided to kind of part ways with kind of their sport emphasis when I was there. So I ended up moving to the University of Tennessee and studying under my advisor, Rob Harden, who had recently kind of started moving in this direction of adopting all these women researchers who were looking at women's sports. And so with our cohort, we started researching a lot about the underrepresentation of women in collegiate athletics. Myself and Dr. Lizzie Taylor, who's at Temple University primarily, as well as Jessica Siegel, who's at UNC Pembroke. The three of us started working together and still work together to this day. Graduated from Tennessee. I've been at multiple institutions now at this point. Most recently, I'm at Georgia State University now. And I think what's maybe the most interesting thing about me is I have a real passion for women's sports outside of what I teach. And so the last several years, I've become really passionate about wanting to get back in the industry. My undergrad degree was in communications and journalism. And so I thought, if I'm going to be in the classroom talking to our students about sport each and every day, I need to do the job. I can't just talk about it to our students and be this person who just talks out of a textbook. I need to be a person who actually teaches based on the things I do. And so I started seeking out opportunities to write. And so it kind of happened out of happenstance last year. I went to the women's basketball NCAA tournament. I went to the men's tournament as well in Boston. And essentially, there was some drastic differences between the fandom, especially at both tournaments. And I'm a big Twitter advocate, and so I like, Twitter can either be a place of love or hate. And for me, it's always been a place of love primarily. And so I just kind of tweeted out and was like, I think I have a story. Would anyone let me tell it? And so Athletic Directors U has always been a place that's let me write about my research. And essentially, their editor said, Hey, Allison, if you can give it more of a data spin, we would like to hear what you have to say. So I wrote about it for Athletic Directors U, and then I had another colleague reach out and say, Hey, if you've got more than one story to tell, then maybe I can connect you to my editor at Awful Announcing. And so basically, organically, it kind of came out of this Twitter like conversation that my editor now at Awful Announcing said, Yeah, let me give you a shot. Like maybe you're a good enough writer that we'll see if you want to continue to write about women's sports. So I've been writing for Awful Announcing for the last year and a half. And it kind of took off. I was just writing about women's basketball and the WNBA. Now I write about basically anything related to women's sports that he has that comes across his plate. Softball, volleyball, Unrivaled, anything related to women's sports.
Mhm.
And that led to an opportunity to work for the Women's Elite Rugby League as their PR consultant. That led to an opportunity most recently to get hired by Forbes as a contributing writer. So a lot of things on my plate at once.
Oh yeah, congrats.
A lot of going on, but it's fun. I mean, I've been writing all day today, and I'm glad Rob, you sent me a text because I was like, oh yeah, I've got to do this thing
Yeah,
today.
I always want people like I always need people to send me reminders. Let me send a reminder. I didn't want to send like early in the morning, and then I'm like, oh, you might forget, 'cause you might get caught up with something.
No, I'm glad you sent me a reminder because I've been blasting off stories all day for the last 2 days. So
Oh, nice. Thank So it was a perfect segue into what my next question was going to be was just talking about your article writing for Awful Announcing, as well as how did the website get their actual name, Awful Announcing, which is pretty cool. I just wanted to hear the story about how they came up with that name.
yeah, honestly, I don't know that I know the answer to that.
Oh, okay.
Um, I know there is a story, and I feel like my editor's name is Matt Yoder, and I remember he told me the story, and I'm blanking. But I think you could probably Google it, and there's probably some myth along the lines of why they go by that. But I do know Awful Announcing is the third largest sport reporting entity in the US. So they're really interesting because they don't really cover like scores and necessarily things. They cover like broadcasting and viewership and like news related to media related to sport. So it's like an interesting spin, and I think it makes them a little unique. So they're not trying to compete with ESPN for the same numbers of like, the news part of what's happening in the games. They're trying to compete with like what's happening in the media related to sport.
And then also I had another question. We were talking about what got you, how did you get into the door with working with Forbes, dealing with covering like the business side of women's sports, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, so again, I think like, if I could give any advice to people, it's like really try to hone your network.
Mm.
So I have a friend whose name is Caroline Fitzgerald. She owns and runs her own company called Goals Sports, which is a women's sports entity. She has a podcast associated with the company. And so her women's sport podcast is crushed in the last several years. We became friends when her podcast was very new, very like had just taken off the ground. We've stayed very close since she's kind of really kind of skyrocketed, and now she's interviewing people at like the top of the ladder. And so she's been someone in my circle for a really long time and a big advocate for me, and I've been a big advocate for her. And so it just kind of happened organically. We were talking about her writing for Forbes, and she said, hey, do you want me to introduce you to my editor? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I think I would love to write for Forbes. And so, same thing, was introduced to the editor. And, part of when you get introduced to the editors, you have to come up with pitches. And so you have to come up with like pitches for stories, or you have to give samples of writing, or you have to write samples for them to see like, hey, yes or no, do we want to hire you on? And so I had a really good conversation with the editor. And then for Forbes, they vet you based on a committee. And so I had to wait to see like, hey,
Double check.
did I pass essentially? So I waited for 2 weeks to find out, and I was hired officially, I think, last week. So, last Monday, and already, I've put out 4 stories in the last like 48 hours or 72 hours. So, been busy.
I love the grind. Uh, yeah, that's why I was telling my student last. Like, it's like obviously it's good to have that knowledge base, but also you got to be able to network because you can have all this knowledge base, but if nobody knows you or what you're capable of, it really doesn't matter, in my opinion. Yeah, it's very it's very good that you're talking about like networking. Also, we jump to my next segue. I know you're a big Unrivaled fan. What are your thoughts of the Unrivaled League and how can this evolve women's sports for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing, especially for, the players that have consistently had to go play overseas.
Mm, yeah.
Obviously getting to stay at home and play in front of their families and being in the United States instead of having to go play in countries, where they're the outsider and, you're not speaking the language and you're spending months and months away from your family in your home. Like, I think that's amazing. Hearing that they're making salaries that are either above what they made in the WNBA or equivalent to what they made in the WNBA for a shorter season is pretty fantastic. I think my only concern is, especially in the last several weeks of watching Unrivaled, is how many players are getting hurt. Because they're coming off a WNBA season, they're only getting a few months off, and then they're running into Unrivaled. And so the last several weeks, there's been a ton of players that have had to be subbed in and out
Mm.
or moved off and on teams because of injury. And so I think that's something that the league maybe needs to address is what are they going to do about like injury reserves and those types of things? Because right now they have a couple players that they're literally just rotating between teams. And so like that's kind of difficult because like I love Natisha Heidemann, but she's been on like four different teams so far in the league. And I'm like, I just would love for her to be on one team. Like I want to cheer for her for the Phantom. I don't want her to be on four different teams. You know
And
what
that's
I
also
mean?
like run other players like that, run them raggedly because they're trying to make up, compensate for other players getting injured, and they might end up getting injured just from like the overuse.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think there's some kinks that they're gonna have to work out, but overall, like I'm really impressed with the structure and the build of the league in comparison to a lot of other leagues that have started in 2025. They spent 2 years really building the structure of this league. They got massive sponsors. They built like this indoor, beautiful arena. Like they put a lot of work and effort into this league. And when you go to the platform in Miami, I was there last week, um, it feels professional and it feels really nice in a way that the players deserve. And I've been to other professional women's leagues where that's maybe not the case. Other leagues that are just starting to build and like that stuff takes time, and I understand that. But I think Unrivaled has really shown that if you build infrastructure and you give players the things that they need, like this can really grow and take off.
Yeah, and also what I like, they implemented a unique structure that not too many leagues do with the one-on-one. And then what I also thought was pretty cool with winning the prize, but also the person that wins, it was interesting. I saw that the teammates won $10,000 a piece, which is unique because you don't see that too often. So basically, even if they got knocked out of the tournament early, at least they gave them, to cheer on their teammate because obviously the teammate when they won a small portion as well. So that was pretty interesting, which even like started to talk with it with NBA do it, and a lot of people was like probably not because a lot of these NBA players have super huge egos, and they lose to like a rookie or somebody not much like a role player. Obviously, people want to get ridiculed on Twitter because Twitter people are very ruthless, and you can say whatever on Twitter. Because you can say anything behind this computer screen. So like for instance, the one with like Brianna Stewart when she lost to Leah Edwards like in the first round, like
Yeah.
she
I
handled it
mean, she lost
gracefully.
11-0 in the opening round to
Yeah,
a
it was ugly, and nothing to take against Aaliyah Edwards. She had a decent season with the Mystics her first year, but Stewie is obviously one of the, arguably one of the best players in the league. So seeing her going out that early, especially being a co-owner league, was like pretty interesting. I feel like she handled it very professionally, whereas I don't think a lot of NBA stars, if they lose to somebody like that, they probably complain talking about the refs or something to try to make excuses for why they lost that bad in the first round. So, hopefully I do want to see that happen in the NBA because I don't know I don't know what your thoughts on that is, but I feel like the All-Star week has just become a joke now, like the NFL Pro Bowl has, and they finally realized they just need to make it flag football. I feel like, the NBA is just grasping at straws at this point. We're trying to, putting like the rising stars and it's kind of getting kind of ridiculous, but I feel like the WNBA definitely, Unrivaled League definitely opened it up for other leagues, not just women's sports, to try new things to get people to view it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why the NBA All-Star like weekend doesn't play like 3-on-3 then. Like,
Yeah.
like it's competitive, it's fun, it's fast paced. Like, I think it does expose a lot of people's game. I think what's been really interesting, I've watched Unrivaled for pretty much almost every game over the last several weeks, and I'm an avid WNBA fan. Like I'm a junkie. Like I could tell you anything about the WNBA, especially over the last several seasons. And I think what's been cool is to see the development of especially some of the younger players in the league. And I think for the NBA and All-Star, like how fun would that be to see some of these younger players play with some older players and like see some of these like pick and pop plays or like who can like really like pick and roll and like and see some of this like cool gamesmanship that the All-Star game doesn't have any of anymore. Like no one takes it seriously. I mean, LeBron literally pulled out what, like 20 minutes before the game? Like, I mean, like if I'm a fan, like it's kind of embarrassing. Like, I mean, you saw the numbers. I mean, I don't know if you did, but the data shows like the All-Star weekend was down this year and it was down by a pretty hefty percentage. Fans aren't tuning in because they know it's not serious.
Yeah, that, and then also even with the viewership down in the regular season, because you got all these players just sitting out like with load management, like LaMelo Ball. It's like he played yesterday, now he's not playing tonight, and it's like that's one thing I love about the NBA. Like if they have players playing back to back, they're playing, and unless they're like super like have like a huge injury, but NBA players they always just like, oh, I'm gonna take off, and I feel like that's another reason why viewership is down. Just because don't want to go to the game and they pay all this like money for a ticket and then they get there and it's like, oh, such and such is sitting out and they find out about an hour before the game and it's like, so I just feel like that's a big, huge chunk of reason why the viewership is down, regular
Yeah.
season as well. But yeah, talk to me about, I know you talked about how your passion with you playing softball and then obviously coaching. Talk about how your passion led to you teaching at the undergraduate and graduate levels now at universities and as well as being contributor writing for women's sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I don't know, I think from a really young age, sports has just been the love of my life, like other than obviously my spouse. And yeah, he still gets that title. But it's always been the thing that I felt the most confident in. It's always been the thing that like made me the most fulfilled. And so when I stopped playing, I had this sense of like this big thing left my life, and I wanted to fill that again. And so one way to do that was to teach it. So whether that's coaching it, because I still coach, or whether that's, teaching it in the classroom and seeing like the light bulb go off and a student connects the concept or see themselves in a leadership role or see themselves, wanting to be a coach themselves. It doesn't really matter what their role in sport is. Just seeing them want to be in sport for me is like the thing that makes me hungry to want to keep doing the job. And so for me, when it comes to the other side of it, being in, looking at the contributing writing or working for the Women's Elite Rugby League, it's more, I love women's sports. I want to see it grow. I want to see it be treated the way that I've always wanted to see it be treated. And so if my small part is writing about it, or it's doing PR for a league, or it's just honestly being the person on Twitter bashing the trolls, like, then fine, I'll do that. And I think that's just like something I really care about. And so it's something I want to continue to do.
Um, Due to the evolution of women's sports over the year, how has this shaped your research interests?
Yeah. Oh, man. I think my research interest has kind of stayed within the two main areas it's always been. I think maybe. Well, I guess that's not necessarily completely true. I have like two main lines of research that have always kind of stayed true. But recently I've started a new research project with two students at Georgia State where we're looking at some trends in the WNBA. And that's obviously come out of like writing about the WNBA and being a fan and just like watching what's been going on recently. And that probably wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been writing for Awful Announcing or Forbes or any of the things that I've been doing. And I have two students that are really interested in women's sports, and two men students that are interested in women's sports, which is really cool to
Yeah,
see too.
I
Like
should.
they wanted to be on this project with me. And so there are some like new things that I'm starting to consider looking at maybe more of like the business side of women's sports or looking at pro sports in a new way. I've always looked at college sports primarily because that's the type of program I came out of at Tennessee. And so I don't know, maybe stay tuned. So far my research hasn't really left the two lines it's always been in, but I think at Georgia State maybe there's some freedom to maybe expand that and look at some new things.
Um, what do you see for the future of women's sports regarding athletics and then academic research?
Hmm. That's a good question. As far as maybe, do you want to be more specific?
I guess, obviously finally starting to see like more attention shown to women's sports. Obviously, we're seeing more women being vocally speaking out. As we know, the Oregon players talked about disproportionality of the athletics facilities that women had at the March Madness tournament compared to the men. So we're seeing more athletes speak out on it now, whereas some women, like back in the day, might have been a little bit more quiet or ignored. Now, like more men and other leadership are being forced to listen to them. So.
Yeah. I think that it can be twofolds. I think you're going to see that those discrepancies are going to continue to be challenged. I think that athletes now and players now are not going to take status quo and they're not going to take the things that maybe players in the past had to take, right? And I don't think that players in the past didn't speak up. I think there are multiple historical figures that definitely spoke up for, these inequities, but I think it just was a matter of the time wasn't right, the resources weren't there, the opportunities and all the things weren't in alignment. Whereas now, in this new wave of women's sports growth and opportunity, plus NIL, plus just like all of these big booming things, you're seeing that like you can't really get away with it as much anymore. My concern though is the new legislation that's coming down in the NCAA and like the new executive orders talking about Title IX and how we hold um how we look at how we look at NIL and how schools like raise money for collectives and how we distribute that money. That's my concern, is just like how will that be equally distributed? And will we have to equally distribute it based on how our government decides to regulate Title IX moving forward?
Yeah, that's definitely a huge because a lot of these kids might go to like a big time school like Juju Watkins at USC or a Big Ten school SEC. Obviously, they might have a bigger NIL deal than some of these schools at like mid majors. So hopefully, like you talk about, like making sure like each person gets like equal portion. But sometimes it might be hard because sometimes you might have those superstar premier athletes that come in the game like Caitlin Clark or Juju Watkins, Angel Reese, where they're so dominant that they obviously receive a large piece of the portion. But you still want to see these smaller players and from these mid-major schools still get their just due. But my other question I thought on that with NIL, how do you think that is? What are your thoughts on NIL deals for women's sports dealing with like going to like WNBA and other professional leagues where now they might not be in a rush as they used to be to go into WNBA now because they're making so much more with NIL deals rather than once they go to play in WNBA.
Yeah, I mean, I think that well, one thing I think that people need to realize is that just Paige Becker signs with Gatorade and Nike, right? Like they're not going to drop her because she goes to the WNBA. Like she's still got multi-million-dollar contracts when she goes to the WNBA. So she's not losing money because she goes to the WNBA. She's probably actually making more money because she's going to sign a 75K contract when she goes to the WNBA on top of all of her endorsement money from her NIL money. So like I think that that's like a misconception that people talk about all the time. I think that it's just a matter of, yes, there's a lot of opportunities to make NIL money in the college sector. And I think for women, though, there is this kind of like finite amount of time. I think women's basketball players, though, have more opportunity to make money longer than maybe other women's athletes, right? Because they have the WNBA, which is starting to be really profitable. And then in 2026, there's going to be a new collective bargaining agreement where rookies are probably going to make more money than they've ever made before. Even, and then the other players are obviously going to make even higher salaries, right? Whereas, like, if I'm Nigeri Kennedy, who plays for Texas Tech as a softball pitcher, she just signed and left Stanford to go to Texas Tech because she's making $1 million a year. Women's pro softball in the US right now is still rather underfunded and doesn't really make a lot of money. Yeah, girl, make your millions of dollars. Like, go to Texas Tech, like, because there's only so many chances to do that as a softball player. Like, I understand that decision. And so, like, I think it depends on the sport when you talk about this argument of like, should you stay in college as a women's athlete because you make more money, or like, should you go to the pros? I think it's sport based when we talk about this conversation, right? Because you've got Livy Dunn who's making millions of dollars as a gymnast. She's not really going to go be on the Olympic team. So yeah, she should make millions of dollars and you get all of the deals with, all of the entities, right? She should use that and do that, and we should applaud her for those endorsements, right? And so I think it's just like a matter of like having these conversations in the full spectrum of what they are, because for some athletes, this is their only chance to make that kind of money. because their sport will truly be done at the end. And then for some athletes, there is actually a real career for them after they get done playing in college, and they do have a real pro career where they can make money after this.
Appreciate it. Let's see. Next, in your opinion, you think that the women's March Madness tournament has become larger than men's March Madness tournament now? Because over the last few years, I don't know if we probably been watching with ESPN, like more even NBA players like Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, they had like an episode where they were talking about how they knew more like women's college basketball players that year than the men's college basketball players in the March Madness. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think when we say the word bigger, are we talking about the people, or are we talking about like the entity of March Madness itself, like making money and the
I would say like more. I would say along the lines of viewership, more I guess engagement.
well, I think like if we go back to the NIL conversation and we go to the difference between men and women's basketball currently right now and the NCAA, I think that those podcasters, right? Because it's like the NBA guys are podcasters now too, right? Everyone has podcasts.
Yeah.
They're not wrong. Like there's a lot of like conversation about the fact that everyone in the men's game right now is a one and done. They go to the NBA. And so like who do you know honestly in the men's game? You know him for a year, right? We all know who Cooper Flag is. But like honestly, I couldn't name many other men's basketball players right now. Whereas I could probably name you about 50 women's basketball players right now. And that, I mean, obviously I'm a massive fan of women's college basketball, but I talk to my dad on a regular basis about basketball, and my dad is a massive UNC Chapel Hill fan. He could tell you the players on that team, but he probably couldn't tell you anybody else outside of that. But he could tell you about 25 women's basketball players. And the difference is women's basketball players are staying in women's basketball longer. They have NIL deals that put them on TV, in commercials, in front of you 24/7, so you know their name, right? And so you watch them and you watch them on TV, you watch them in the tournament, and viewership is up for the women's basketball tournament compared to previous years. And so I think like, do I think the men's basketball tournament is larger still than women's? Yes. But is the women's basketball tournament trending up? 100%. And is the fact that one and done is happening for the men? I think it's hurting them. I think it's hurting their viewership because who the heck knows anyone in the men's game right now? Again,
Yeah,
all I know is Cooper Flag. That's the only guy I know on the men's side. And I know
it's like
some Carolina players.
yeah, because outside, I'd say like teams like Auburn, who tends to keep players a nucleus core for about 3 to 4 years, and then Alabama. But the other teams like Duke, they're always reloading every year. Kentucky's always reloading now.
I know
Obviously,
everyone on the Tennessee team, but that's because I went to Tennessee. Like you only
right.
know your affiliation of like where you went to school, but like you couldn't name players from other teams. Whereas I could tell you everyone that's in contention for the Player of the Year award right now for the women's teams. Like I think it's just again, that's because I write for women's sports, but I think that you know people from commercials, right? How many times have you seen Juju Watkins on State Farm commercials? I haven't seen Cooper Flag in a single commercial on TV.
Yeah, it's pretty, and that's a good thing because obviously they're giving like showing more women. Like you saw, I see WNBA like retired Sue Bird, Asia Wilson. I love that commercial where she has a super small car and it's pretty funny. But it's just good to see like more women representation in these brand deals, brand awareness, and obviously like big time like State Farm and not just athletic products, which is pretty cool to me. Um, as we talk about women's college basketball taking the next step, and we obviously know softball is big and volleyball. What can these other sports do to continually bring that notarized and viewership to their sport to have more people come in? It's like, hey, okay, this is getting interesting. Let me take a look at this sport as well, because we all know that softball, basketball, and volleyball are the three main juggernauts. Like, how can these other sports, like gymnastics or tennis, uh, get more people to like get their notoriety, take a page out of like college basketball and these three main juggernauts, and just how to bring that notoriety to those sports.
Yeah, I think it's like the chicken and the egg conversation though. I think that's the ultimate thing, right? So here's a perfect example. OU gymnastics last night had 39,000 people that went and watched OU gymnastics.
Mhm.
That wasn't on TV, right? So you wouldn't have known that 39,000 people showed up to watch OU gymnastics, right? And so I think this is like the chicken and the egg conversation, right? You have to put it on TV for people to know it's readily available and that it's selling out and that there's tons of people there and that this is like some prime time event that people want to go to outside of just the fact that the culture of OU is that people go to OU gymnastics, right? And so this is like the conversation all the time in women's sports is you have to show it for people to know that it's there and for it to be this hyped thing that people want to follow. And what ESPN did is very early on, it invested in volleyball, softball, and women's basketball. It did it very early on, and then in like the late 90s, early 2000s. It did it with softball, it did it with women's basketball, and it did it with volleyball. And look where they all are now. Like they sell out. They have massive ratings when it comes to the World Series and March Madness, and we saw it with the volleyball tournament this past year. And so I think it's going to take these media entities saying, I'm going to get in and I'm going to invest now in soccer or gymnastics or I don't know, swimming or whatever it might be. And then people will also attend and they'll buy tickets and then they'll watch. But like you have to put it on TV first. You have to have the media buy in too. There's like they both have to work together for these things to happen and to see this like big growth.
Yeah, and also like I was talked about a little bit in my digital media and PR class. We talk about like obviously gatekeeping, like a lot of these, editors and then people these main sports shows channels. They try to gatekeep. They're like, oh, the people probably want to watch this sport, so they try to block it. Well, you don't really know if someone do it like wants to watch it or not until you actually put it out there and see, get the data that shows whether they like it or they don't. You can't just like speculate what people gonna like, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean there's a famous like saying or story about there was a prominent figure at ESPN that really early on basically like blocked WNBA from being put on TV. And so like part of the reason why the league struggled with viewership is they had someone that was like, I don't want this on TV. This isn't gonna make money, but yet didn't give it a shot to make money. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you have to give something a shot, right? Like we've put the what is it? The league that The Rock has invested in like time and time again, the football league that fails every year and just crushes money in the pit every single year. Like the UFL or whatever it is. I don't remember the name of the league, but it's basically like the minor league for the NFL. They try every couple years like re to revive this league, and every couple years they just like piss millions and millions of dollars away for this league, and they try to put it on TV, and it just like sucks. But
So
like
yeah, yeah, United Football League. That's what
yeah,
if
we
they
just
can't.
like keep giving it money, we keep giving it TV deals, and it's like no one wants to watch it because it's not the NFL.
Right.
But like
And
we're not going to give other like women's sports a chance. Like, come on.
yeah, because it's like yeah, because it always comes on and like and everybody's like, oh, this is a supplement to football. And then I watched a few games and I was just like, yeah, this is terrible. I can't watch this. But like you said, but obviously they're like, oh, people might want to watch this. So again, I feel like I talked about in class like writers and then broadcasters or these the guys making decisions think they have their own selective bias or what they think obviously what they think they want to see they think everybody else wants to see, which is an issue. um but hopefully that continues to get fixed. What are your thoughts on allyship between men and women in sports, obviously to help continue to evolve women's sports?
Yeah, I mean, I think like this kind of goes to what you were just talking about, right? So like if you want to see change to where you see more diverse pairings of and options of what you see on TV, then you have to have people that are making decisions at the top look different. And it can't just be the same people that have made the decisions year after year, decade after decades, right? And so, or if those people are the same, then in terms of allyship, they need to listen to women or, underserved groups, racial and ethnic minorities that are coming up through the pipeline and say like, hey, like maybe this sport is more interesting, or maybe we should show this, or maybe we should have this person serve this beat when it comes to like writing about X, Y, or Z. Like I think that's where we've seen media really struggle. If you look at the stats, I'm sure you've probably had your class look at this, but like the stats are abysmal when it comes to like our media members. It's predominantly white and it's predominantly male who writes about sport, who makes decisions about sport, who put sport on TV, who are editors, who are just like every single rank when it comes to media members. And so we don't want to just be the one black reporter or the one woman reporter or the one this or the one that, right? We want to have a multi-layered approach to sport. And so then we can say, sport is a multitude and a multifaceted approach to things. And so if we're thinking about allyship, then it's allowing and opening the door for others to come into the room and have a real say, or it's sponsorship and putting someone up for a job that is qualified, but you're using your power and your leverage to open the door for that person and to put them up for a job that they really deserve, right? And so, that's, my friend Caroline saying, let me introduce you to an editor. That's my friend Katie saying, let me introduce you to my editor at Awful Announcing. That's me saying to a student that one of my colleagues introduced me to, yeah, let me introduce you to my editor at Awful Announcing. It's like opening the doors for each other so that we can continue to change who writes about sport, who talks about sport, who, does anything in the sport field so that it isn't just the same people that's been making the decisions time and time again.
Because definitely you get more women into, obviously more women that have make leadership roles, we can see definitely continue to see even more change. Also, as you talked about earlier, like networking, I feel like because it's funny because I've talked with a lot of women in sports earlier, either in academia or just in general in sports, where they talk about. You can let me know if you ever had any issue with this, where like women or other women see women as competition rather than allies, and I can kind of see it because obviously it's not that many women in sports, so you see someone that's another woman, they might think, oh, okay, this might be the person that could replace me. But in my opinion, I feel like you should see that person as a person and you can help build that partnership with. Because I always say, like, if you want to go far, you got to be able to, you can't just do it on your own. You got to have somebody with you. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true. I mean, we want to have women that are supporting and uplifting other women. I don't, it does us no good to cut each other down. It's been hard enough to break into this field. There's no room for hurting each other's chances. And I think in the past there's been a lot of like perspective of there's only places for one or two of us. And so, we don't want to open the door for each other. And I don't think that's a fair way of looking at it anymore. I think it's about, my perspective has always been, you know, it's about extending the table for whoever can fill and sit at the table with me. That's always been my perspective, and it will continue to always be my perspective, whether it's for my students or whether it's for people I work with or just like honestly anyone that I meet that's a good person. I'll try to help you. Um, but not everyone is like that, but I think that's how people should be.
Appreciate you. So now we get down to the part with closing remarks and anything else you want to add, and also letting people know where they can follow you on social media.
Oh man, closing remarks. I feel like I've hit all the big highlights. I think if I can convince anyone, it's that women's sports are amazing. So go out and follow. The conference tournaments for women's basketball are currently happening. There's a lot of amazing games going on. And the March Madness tournament is starting in the next couple weeks. So definitely tune in. College softball is right in its prime, getting ready to start conference play. So definitely tune in for that as well. As a former softball player, I think that's obviously amazing. So shout out to all the softball players out there. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. That's probably where I'm most active at Allison B. Smith 15. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same handle. Not as active probably there yet. I'm still trying to figure out Blue Sky. And then I'm also on LinkedIn with my name, Allison Smith. But probably harder to find me there because I have a pretty generic name, but you can look me up by finding me through looking up Allison Smith and looking for Georgia State.
Appreciate you coming on, Dr. Smith.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. See ya.